Hello and welcome back to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. I'm Colin McFader, and I'm joined once again by Clark Coffey from sunny California.
Sunny and smoky.
Yeah, I guess it is smoky these days, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about Lesson 6 in Werner Herzog's Masterclass, which is all about negotiation skills,
Oh yeah.
both with, financiers and actors and things like that. Just kind of general skills that you should have going into a film career, but also perhaps something you can take away even if you aren't going into film. There's always going to be negotiations in life, so,
Absolutely.
these
And
skills are
and
kind of universal.
and as always, Werner Herzog remains controversial, as
Hmm.
he is in many of his statements about filmmaking and art. He certainly doesn't let us down here. Definitely has some potentially controversial comments about working on handshakes versus contracts, et cetera, et
Hmm.
cetera. But we'll
Hmm.
get into that stuff. But yeah, so negotiation skills, um, and right off the bat, Herzog mentions that you should be candid. Well, that's yes. I think I would definitely agree with that. What do you think, Cullen? Should you lie when you're negotiating, or should you
Oh, always, absolutely.
always?
You should tell them that you got like six other backers who are each putting in
There, well,
400K.
we laugh, but of course, this happens all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Unfortunately, people are, and maybe sometimes it's that they are, excited or passionate about the project, and best case scenario is a little bit of exaggeration kind of gets in there. Of course, sometimes people are just flat out dishonest and will
Hmm.
do anything they want to get some, things done. But this is definitely not controversial to me. I certainly agree with Herzog. I think that if you want longevity in this business, then it certainly behooves you to be honest. I'm curious, have you ever had any experiences where somebody was dishonest? Maybe it was like a project somebody was wanting to hire you, um, or maybe a collaborator or somebody. I'm just curious if you had ever experienced
I wouldn't
anybody.
say like explicitly dishonest,
Yeah,
but there, I think a lot of people, like you said, they get kind of swept up in the passion of it, and so they'll exaggerate
right,
things that
right.
maybe aren't. And sometimes that can be kind of harmless. Sometimes it can kind of get someone into trouble
No question.
later on. But
Yeah.
I've had the even just something like we're really hoping to make a return on this, so you'll probably get paid, and then of course that doesn't
Well, that
always
yeah,
go into those things. I'm always kind of like, yeah, I'm
sure.
probably gonna make nothing on this, but
Well, and that's definitely my experience too. I mean, their deferred payment is a very popular type of payment here.
hmm
At our level, where we're in the beginnings of our careers as filmmakers, I think many people have probably experienced that. I've certainly experienced that on the actor side when I was primarily pursuing acting. I can't tell you how many gigs I had deferred payment. But I've even had producer roles that were similarly structured, and yeah, I
and I've heard
think
horror stories too. I think
yeah,
we all have, where it's like
yeah,
just absolute chaos and things like that. But
yeah, and it's and we're not going to get into the super nitty gritty of these kind of things, but boy,
hmm
I mean, there are a million different ways to structure payment. And a lot of those ways, I would say probably 999,999 of them could leave you with no pay in the future.
yeah,
but
yeah.
but yeah, and so I think it just maybe the take home here is, be honest yourself. And of course, there's a lot of different reasons why you should do that. Just be a decent human being, but be careful. Because people, even honest people, they get excited and passionate, and it's extremely difficult to get a film made, and sometimes people will start to stretch that reality just a hair to try to get it made. Um, so definitely, I think it's always be careful. Now, now we go into Herzog talks about attorneys and utilizing attorneys to
hmm
do deals. So here we've just said, there can definitely be a lot of pitfalls when you're negotiating a contract. Herzog says, stay away from attorneys. What do you think, Cullen?
Yeah, I mean, I can totally see why someone like Werner Herzog would want to stay away from attorneys.
Sure.
Um, I think that there's like a level to that in which they can kind of, I think there's always going to be an issue with someone who fundamentally doesn't necessarily understand the process being involved in that process. And most entertainment attorneys understand filmmaking to a certain level,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
there's always going to be a little bit of communication kind of headroom there. But I also think, like, for your own safety, I would always recommend just even, sitting down with an entertainment lawyer or even a family lawyer, just to not, I mean, I don't mean like a divorce lawyer, but your
Yeah.
family lawyer if you have one.
Understood. Yeah.
But and just getting them to read over a contract or something like that, because
An attorney that's at least an attorney that is at least skilled at reading and understanding contracts.
because
Right.
sometimes
Yeah.
you can just get into a thing where there's legal jargon in there, and as much as you always want to expect the best intentions of everybody, there are times when people will intentionally throw things in contracts to basically screw you over,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Well,
to
I mean, I think it's interesting to point out. I mean, I think there are levels in which I completely agree with Herzog, and there are kind of some other levels where I don't know that I would operate in the exact same way myself. I mean, you got to look at where Herzog is in his career too. I mean, we're talking about somebody who has had a tremendous amount of experience making films over numerous decades. He is, for the most part, highly regarded and has built up a network in the industry of people that he has worked with many times before. So he's probably in a different position than a lot of people listening to this podcast. If are in fact interested in pursuing a career as a filmmaker, you're probably not so well established. And so, that's definitely a difference to consider. I mean, I think on the one hand, I get where he's coming from. It's like, I have had film relationships, projects stalled for a year or more because the contracts were just so complicated and overwrought, and it just caused fear and confusion. And so, on the one half, I really believe simple, plain language and short are definitely better. You really can kill an otherwise potentially exciting, interesting project with just just a ton of bureaucracy and legalese. I mean, you completely smother a project with that. And attorneys tend to come from that angle, right? I mean, that's what they've studied. That's what they spent their whole life doing. It's like, they're not doing their job unless they've got a 60-page contract where every single possible contingency of outcome is, hashed out to the nth degree. I mean, that can definitely just befuddle and confuse a project. So on the one hand, I get that. But on the other hand, I mean, I kind of agree with you that that it's not a bad thing to have an attorney at least look over a contract, especially for a significant project. Now, I mean, it's like that, you got to take that into account too, right? If it's like you and a handful of friends making a short film,
you bring your attorney along.
I mean, come on, yeah. But I mean, but if there's if there's significant money or time involved, or both, right? I mean, especially if you're going to be investing in somebody else's project, if you're a producer and you're putting money into it, I think that, or if you're putting a substantial amount of time in it, and the project has the potential to actually get distribution, has the potential to actually be seen. I mean, you definitely want to protect your interests, your investment, protect your credit, and how you're represented, and what kind of creative input and control you have. So,
and not to speak for Herzog, but I think I can see kind of where he's going with this point, which is more that during creative negotiation, during points where you're going back and forth about decisions that you are going to make as the let's say you're being hired as director. Those things I can understand why you wouldn't necessarily want, like, at that point you're just kind of thinking, let's talk about the picture, and then we can get the legal stuff out of the way later at a set point. But I can understand why you wouldn't necessarily want to concern yourself with legal jargon and all that at the beginning of the process, or even just in an initial before anything's signed. But I think, again, on the flip side of that is it's a catchy phrase, but I think on the flip side of that phrase of don't negotiate with an attorney present or whatever, I would say that definitely when you're signing something, you want at least somebody to read that over for you
Yeah.
because, I mean, as you said, you can get into some sticky situations.
Right. And it could be, and it's not even necessarily that somebody is out to get you and you're being actively screwed in a contract, but you could just not realize that you could have had potentially more, more input in the creative process. Maybe or just to make sure that your credit is properly represented when it's all said and done, that your
Yeah,
input is
yeah,
represented properly, in the credits for it, or that your investment is properly represented and accounted for, and yeah, and it's funny. Like you mentioned, worrying about these things too early, but I can't tell you how many times, just countless times, that what should have been a creative conversation has been completely cut off by somebody being, darn near paranoid about the legality of something.
yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
I mean, it's like, come on, especially at this level, it's like, you have to sign three. It's like, somebody who has no credits and has like never produced a film in their life, and they're like, you need to sign 5 NDAs before I can even show you, the script. And
Well,
I'm like, oh my
it's funny
gosh,
that you
come on.
mentioned that because I think that's a very film school thing.
Oh,
Is that so?
it
I
must
actually
be.
worked on, and it was a great. I mean, if any of these people that I worked on this project with, I actually enjoyed the project and enjoy the people very much. But they were all students at a local film school here, one of the
That
more
shall
major
not be
ones here.
named.
And yeah, and I have people that work there too that are in my circles, so I don't want.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But no, they were all students at this film school, and I was acting in this. I was acting this with a friend. So whenever I'm acting, even though I do have the experience of behind the camera, I really try and siphon myself off, and I go, no, I'm the actor for this. I'm not gonna
Yeah,
make any sort of comments on anything else. I'm just gonna
right.
sit here and
Which
do
is,
my job.
yeah.
But I can remember that even though around here, just outside of Toronto and mostly within Toronto too, you don't actually need permits to shoot in public spaces.
Oh, wow.
The only time you need permits is if something you are doing is disrupting public traffic. So whether that's walking traffic or like car traffic, that's
Sure.
really. I mean, there are specialized
What about
permits
horse and
for.
buggy traffic?
Oh
Is
no, that's we've got anti-Amish discrimination laws here. So,
okay, good,
but
good.
no, we so you really don't, and especially when you're out of the city, like the worst that'll happen in the city is a cop will come up and ask you, what's going on, and you kind of explain it away, and it's fine. Out of the city, nothing. Like it's in the suburbs, nobody will ever care.
Yeah.
But when we were shooting at this hiking trail once, public property. And there's like train tracks along it, and that's why we were shooting there, is because there's this. I can't quite remember what the idea of the story was, but there were these train tracks, and something had to do with the train tracks, and
Was
we
something
were
like
far away
happening on
from
the
them.
wrong side of the train
Yeah,
tracks?
yeah,
Was there-
very very spooky.
Okay.
But I remember any time a person would walk by, the entire crew, and they all went to this film school. I was not at that film school.
Yeah.
Would pack up all of the gear, put it all in their bags,
Oh,
and then
is-
sit. And it was like anytime anybody would walk by, whether it was a car
Interesting.
driving by or, and there was this whole contingency plan of like, if somebody asks us what we're doing, here's our like teacher contact that we have to tell them, and we're just making a tiny short film for this university or this college. And I just remember sitting there, and again, I was talent, so I just kind of sat there and didn't say anything. But I was just like, I can't imagine the paranoia there of like, what you kind of. I always say, to a reasonable degree, and obviously not compromising safety ever. But like, what is the worst that can happen in terms of just stuff like that?
Yeah.
Like if someone walks by and asks us what we're doing there and says, "Well, you got to leave," the worst thing that would happen is the very worst case scenario there is the police would show up and ask us to leave. Like
Right.
that's really the very worst scenario. So it's like, is it worth? Which would also never happen because technically there's no law that prohibits what you're doing. So just read up on the local laws and kind of don't worry about that stuff. But yeah, I do agree with you that there are times when it's like it really impedes progress how paranoid people can get
Right.
about, and that goes for location permits to everything from, as you said, like I've got you to sign an NDA before you read the script, stuff like that. It's like, at the end of the day, if I'm sending someone a script, maybe I'll, the most real stake I'll put in it is just doing the watermark with their name on it. So at least if I know that it's being distributed, it was distributed by them.
Yeah.
But even then, that's a pretty rare thing. Most people I send my scripts to, I can trust on a pretty basic level.
Yeah, yeah, and again, it's like obviously people at different levels in their career, and I think different levels of security, so to speak,
Yeah.
might
Yeah.
apply. But I've just, again, I've seen it at, and assuming here that most of this audience would be, if you're taking the masterclass lessons, maybe you're just a fan of Herzog's, but likely you're pursuing a career as a filmmaker, and you're likely, near-ish the beginning of your career. I mean, yeah, I've just seen so many times where people are just so terrified. And maybe you're right. I hadn't thought about that, but it seems like the vast majority of those people were film school students, at least at one point. And not having been one myself, I'm not quite sure what the curriculum might be, but I'm sure they probably do go over quite a bit of how to protect yourself legally and cover your own butt. But yeah, it's just been sometimes shocking to me how people are so terrified to share a script or, discuss certain aspects of what a creative relationship or partnership might look like.
Do you know what I find weird too?
Yeah.
Is working on small projects and personal projects or things that you kind of have complete creative control, or you, a group of friends, have complete creative control about. And then the people that are constantly concerned about credit, that are never stop. If one thing changes in the production, and it's like, am I still getting credit for this, or are you getting credit for that now, or blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And I always think that's so funny, because it's like, to me, I don't worry about credit until the movie's done, and then I look back at the work that everyone's done and I credit accordingly. That's
Right.
kind of how credit goes for me. I mean, of course, there are instances when in advance things are signed about certain credits, but on a general note of like indie filmmaking or very small scale, low to no budget filmmaking, usually that's just kind of how it works. Is you do the job, and people might take on multiple roles that they weren't necessarily signing on to do, but they happily kind of jump into those roles, and then you credit them accordingly afterwards. But I think that's so funny that there's some people who are so concerned about
Sure.
steadfast in making sure that at all moments of production that exactly who's getting credited for what. And
Well, and just to say, playing a little bit, a little bit of the other side of the coin here. I mean, this is one area where I think contract, and when I say contract, I mean you can have just a page. Contract doesn't have to be some 60-page long thing filled with legalese. And I think that's one of the things Herzog says here. The longer it gets, the less likely that you're going to actually make a film.
Yeah,
and I agree with that to a certain point, especially at these kind of more, I don't want to say amateur, but kind of beginning of career phases. But you can completely. I mean, I think some people, I think, are paranoid about that, maybe for reason, because they've done a lot of work that wasn't represented in the credits on a previous film. I've seen that happen myself. Other times, people are just skeptical or afraid in general, or maybe they're hyper focused on what their credits are going to be. But oftentimes too, that's all people are getting out of working on a production at a lower level. They're not getting paid, and that credit they're hoping will add to their resume and lead to
the exposure
paid work,
payment.
So I can kind of sympathize a little bit. But those are things, I mean, I've done that myself. Like I've got a documentary feature that I'm in pre-production on here, and we unfortunately did spin our wheels for quite a bit of time. We started to go down that route of having too convoluted a contract to designate how we were going to work together at this stage where it's a biography, and so we're working on ownership and position and all these kind of things. And I just very simply in plain language put exactly what I wanted my my credit to be. And this is the work that I'm going to do, and this is what I want my credit to be. I mean, it's appropriate to the, I can't say, as a producer, I can't say I want to be named director in the credits, of course. But just to have that in writing, it's very clear, it's up front. This is my responsibilities. This is what I'm going to get paid for completing those responsibilities, and this is what my credit's going to be. Very simply.
And that's exactly what I mean. Is that on a very basic level? I totally. That was kind of what I had actually recently just done too for this feature. Is that very upfront. I just kind of said, here's what I will be doing. Here's the roles that I'll be taking on. And me and the producer team were very clear that we also didn't want, at any point, we didn't want the financials to compromise anything with creative decisions that, if there was a financier coming in that was offering, an ample sum of money, that we wouldn't want to compromise any of those creative decisions. But again, it was kind of exactly like you said. It was up front. We just kind of had a piece of paper
Yeah.
and said, okay, so I'm directing, I'm EP, and here's the roles that I'll be carrying out, and kind of things
Yeah.
like that. Just very simply.
Very simply. But you know
And
what?
yeah.
It kind of, but I think it forces, or it should. I mean, I think ideally when you're doing this, what it's forcing you to do is be very clear and very specific in your communication of expectation. And whether you put that on a piece of paper or not, that is such an important aspect of, of creating a partnership, setting out to make a film. I mean, and through every stage, I think, just to kind of reiterate here, sometimes it seems like common sense, but I've seen so many times where this doesn't actually happen in practice. To be very clear, communicate well with the people that you're going into business with, create clear expectations of what's being asked from you, and of what of what your responsibilities are, but also of what your powers, I guess, your what does that give you then? If I'm doing X, what do I get for Y? And that doesn't always have to be money, but it's some level of creative input or control, or et cetera, et cetera.
That's super important. Hierarchy too.
And so it's
Establishing
just really
those things.
clear. Yeah, setting. I've just seen, where people have not set expectations properly, and you've got two different people who are so on different pages for expectations of what their role in the film is going to be and what they're going to get out of it when it's done, and the two people didn't realize going into it that they were on such different pages. And you get halfway into the film, or you come to some kind of milestone, and you're already in the thick of it, and now these two people realize that they're just on completely different pages.
Oh,
And
I've
boy,
had that
I've
experience
seen
on things
just
that I've worked on. Like I've had
Yeah.
experience on things that I actually, for a little anecdote, the Western that I did last year. And I was so initially we were a friend of mine and I, who's still a really good friend of mine,
Well, that's good.
co-wrote.
At least we know you guys survived the story.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But
You're
we
still
co-wrote
friends, good.
and then kind of stepped up and said, okay, let's co-direct it. And basically what it was that so I was going to be kind of the director behind the camera, doing most of the cinematography as well, and then he was co-directing and also playing not the main character but a sort of supporting role.
And that's
So
tricky. The co-director thing is tricky. I mean, that's
that's exactly what we found was that we got, it was like the third day of shooting, and it wasn't explicit arguments, like nothing ever got hot-headed, but it was just very, very fundamental disagreements on certain elements of like I'd be setting up a shot and he would come over and sort of disagree with the placement of the camera or something like that. And so it became to a point where we sort of halted filming for a few days and had a phone call, and I sort of said, I think what would do best for this is if and again, it wasn't supposed to be a power grab as much as it can kind of seem like that, but I sort of said, why don't I just take kind of the sole director's position on this?
Yeah.
And then you can, when it comes to the writing, you can totally, if we have any script revisions or things like that, you're absolutely involved in that. But when it comes to like the on-set kind of hierarchy there, it's going to really simplify things, especially since we have such different visions. And it was the first time we'd ever really like co-directed something like that. And we realized that,
that's huge.
the ideas for how we play out scenes are so different. And what you'll see with most co-directing teams usually is that they specialize in different areas. Like the Coens, one of them is super into, working with the actors and kind of, and all that side of production. And the other one is much more into the DP, the cinematography, technical stuff. And
Right.
same with the, Phil Lord and Chris Miller, like most big director duos that co-direct all the time.
Have a clean division. Yeah,
they have a very clean division, and I think but they, at the same time of having a clean division, they have faith in each other that they'll fulfill the vision that they each share. Whereas what I found was that we didn't share a vision. We had a very different idea as to what the aesthetic and what the just on a general note, what the look and the feel of the movie should be.
But you can see, I mean, had you guys, before you even started shooting, had you communicated those expectations much more clearly, you wouldn't have had to have paused shooting. And, of course, depending on the size and scope of the production, having to take a couple days to sort that out when you're in the middle of it could be just devastating.
No, it could be the final blow. Yeah,
it could be.
And I think that, I'm glad that it happened on something like that where we were really in creative control of the project, because it like I'm actually quite frankly glad it happened. Period, because it taught me a lot about, I just don't think I'm one to co-direct. I think that's not my thing, and I'm glad that I learned that. But it also, again, going into this feature, kind of taught me exactly that I really want explicit. And I think when I kind of meant to sort of what I more meant was that I care about duties and tasks, and I think this is much in line with what you're saying. I care about duties and tasks being carried out by the people who are assigned to those roles, and
Right.
so that when you get on set, you know what you're doing. You know
Yeah.
where to go, what to do, what to set up, and kind of how to prepare for the shoot. What I kind of don't really care about is at least especially when things are so tense in production and stuff is just this like constant worrying of where the person's name is going to appear in the credits and things like that,
Right.
which
Yeah. I
again, as you
understand.
said, I can sympathize with when you're working on something with someone that you might not know very well. Then of
Right.
course you want that credit. But if it's I've got a group of 3 friends and me, so 4 of us total that have for the past 2 or so years been making movies together, almost nonstop, and kind of trying to build up to this feature, which is what we're at now.
Hmm.
And so we all know each other. We all know that there's not going to be a sudden shift in credit at the end, like the last hour, and that I'm going
Right.
to lose my writer's credit or whatever. So that's kind of the point where I'm just sort of like, well, let's just sit down and worry about the actual production aspect of these things right now, and then later on, once we kind of get through the thick of it, we can re-examine those credits, even though they're already written out. We've got them written out, but we can re-examine them if anything's changed
Yeah.
and kind of go that way. But
Well, and it's like you trust these people, right? And this is what
yeah,
Herzog's
exactly.
talking. When Herzog says, doing a deal with the handshake, I mean, what's implied kind of behind that statement is a big, huge, giant pile of trust, right?
Mutual trust.
I
Yeah.
mean, huge, and so he doesn't speak to that specifically, but what we can hear for just a second, I don't think he means go make a handshake deal with a total stranger that you've never worked with before and you have no idea who this person is and you've not vetted them and, et cetera, ad nauseum. He's talking about doing a handshake deal with somebody that he clearly trusts these people. So, and this is no matter what stage of your career you're in, this is well within your power to do, to research somebody, to take a look at what their track record is, and especially depending on the scope, certainly if they're asking you to invest money or invest a huge amount of your time, I mean, you've got to do your due diligence. And I'll say this, and this is from experience for me for sure. I used to think that I was a really good judge of character, and people would tell me, "You're a really great judge of character, Clark." And I thought, I mean, I like kind of it was almost a pillar of my like how I saw myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people kind of feel I'm likely. I think if you asked 100 people, hey, do you feel like you're a good judge of character? I'm going to guess probably like 95 people are going to say they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we have all these kind of intuitive keys that we kind of use. We think somebody's lying or not lying. Well, I will offer this little piece to people out there. It's very likely, matter of fact, it's almost a certainty, that you are not as good a judge of character as you think you are.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because humans are not nearly as good a judge of characters, this intuitive kind of response that we have to people that really convinces us, right? It's very convincing to you inside your mind, inside your heart. But we aren't not nearly as good at predicting people's behavior by just our intuitive sense of who they are. And this has been borne out in study after study after study after study. And I would offer this suggestion to people to actually look at track record, to actually look at what is this person's history of work. Have they
Mm-hmm.
ripped off other people? Have they, are there people out there complaining that their work environment was crap or that they were horrible to get along with, et cetera, et cetera? That's what's important. And sometimes, of course, that track record doesn't exist if people are just starting out. But, inevitably, there are people that they've worked with. There are previous projects. Don't hesitate to talk to those people, to reach out to them to see what they're, because that's the only way to predict a person's kind of future performance is by looking at their past performance. So,
Oh yeah.
if you're getting ready to get in bed with somebody on a major project, and it's going to take a lot of your time or your money or whatever your reputation, you're always putting your reputation online when you put yourself with a group of people to work on a project. I could not more strongly recommend that you look at the major primary collaborators that you'll be working with. Look at their track record.
Yeah,
So
and the film industry is such a small world that the likelihood that you actually know somebody who has worked with that person before is actually really high. I've noticed that every time I get a job
sure,
with somebody or I'm
dude,
offered a
yeah,
position with somebody that I know, even if it's not like a very, close friend or something, I'll know somebody that has worked with them in the past, and so I can have a very candid conversation about
yeah,
what was the working environment like, what was the even something as like how prompt were the payments if there's payment involved.
absolutely,
That's so
absolutely.
important because that
It is
can
so important.
I've
And I
had
just
great set experiences before, and then the payment didn't come for 3 months of me prodding to get that payment after, and I have no interest in working with those people again, even
absolutely
though the set experiences were great. It's like not to say that I'm a stickler for I gotta get my money,
no,
but there just becomes a point where it's like, are you so focused on your own project that you're now
yeah.
undermining
You have to
the
demand
efforts and
respect. Yeah, you have
yeah,
don't and
yeah.
don't feel bad about that either. I mean, you even kind of, hedged a little bit. You're like, "Hey, well, it's not like I'm, just consumed by payment. It's not why I do this." Yeah, and I think we've all said that at some point or another. I've had payment be late as well, et cetera, et cetera. And you're like, "Oh, I don't want to be that person who's like seems like I'm only in it for the money or something like that." But I always see this as like a sign of respect, right? I mean, unless there's been some substantial something has happened with production, nobody's getting paid, like an investment, something substantial. But I mean, barring extremely rare circumstance, if your side of the bargain is not being fulfilled by the people that you've made that contract with, that this is just pure disrespect. I'm not
hmm
going to work
And
with
I've got
people
that written right
who
into the the contract that I get
Sure.
any clients to work with is I've got a thing about new clients. I get half up front,
Oh yeah.
and then after the fact, after the payment, it's
Well, let's
30
talk
days
about
is
that.
the
Let's
max
talk about
thing
this
for
real quick. Let's put this in
yeah.
context for people. Let's talk about this. So, what you're talking about now, correct me if I'm wrong, is your videographer or director for hire side of your work,
Yes,
right?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So we both have experience with this, just for the people out there to get some idea of our context. So now we're kind of talking a little bit less about making, like feature narrative films or documentary films, and now we're kind of talking about a gun for hire, doing industrials, advertise, commercials, that kind of thing. So I have never worked in that capacity without a contract, ever, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Ever. And I would strongly, and of course this is different. Herzog is not exactly talking about this kind of work, but what we can speak to it a little bit here. Yeah, I mean, I've never worked as a videographer or as a director for marketing type content without a contract. Now they're quite simple, but they always designate how much I'm getting paid. They always designate what happens if I don't get paid and what amount of time. It always very specifically designates exactly what is being asked of me and exactly what the client is getting and exactly when they're getting it and how much that cost. Um, I mean, to
And any
extremely high
caveats
detail.
of I've
You
got
got it.
caveats in there for any broken equipment and what things like that. And I
Yes.
think that the other thing too is what I've learned is that, and if I can give any advice to somebody who's starting out, it is never rude to the other person to vouch for yourself.
Tell us what you mean
And
by
so
that.
so I think a lot of people going into it think that, so in my contract now, I've got a thing that says, after 30 days, if the payment isn't received, then a 1.5% compounding interest rate will be added.
Wow, you're
So
generous. I think mine's like 10.
oh, I should up my prices. But I
Well,
mean, even
the
then, it's
rates
one of
have
those
been
things
going
where
down, so you're probably it's like now with rates like the Fed's got it at zero here in the United
yeah, yeah,
States.
yeah, yeah.
Maybe you're more in line with reality. But anyway, I
But
jest,
I
I
think
jest.
that's
But
the thing is you think of that like when I was first starting out and I was putting that in there, I was like, oh, does it sound like I'm threatening the person? But no,
mm,
no, no. It is never. I think that a lot of people that are starting out, they
are
fear
afraid. They're afraid
sounding
to ask.
rude, or
Yes.
they fear exactly. And it was the same thing when I was working as a bartender. If my boss said, "Hey, can you work late tonight?" I would say, "Yeah, here's what I want to extend my hours there. This is what I will be getting for that." And it's
Hmm.
again, it's negotiation. Most of the
Right.
time, those people, if they have the money to pay you, they will pay you, and they won't have any, they won't go, that person was rude because they asked for more payment, because you just have to prove that you're worth that payment. But
Well, and
again,
this,
it's
yeah,
just one of those things that like I've just noticed that a lot of people are scared to kind of vouch for themselves in that way, and to really set the bar there to a point where you're going, this is what my terms are. And if everything goes well, then we'll have a great time. Then it'll be fine, and we'll have a great working relationship.
This is a good point, Cullen. This is a really good point. Herzog doesn't, again, he doesn't speak to this specifically or directly, but this is a really good point. And to touch on is that, you do have to value yourself, regardless of where you're at in your career. It's really important to value yourself, whether you're an actor, or director, writer, DP, whatever position you are on set. It's so important to value yourself, and it's okay. Not only is it okay, but it's if you're a professional, it's absolutely expected that you dictate the terms at which you want to be a part of this project.
People will usually, weirdly enough, respect you more for doing so.
Absolutely. Yeah. Of course. Anybody who's worth working with, anybody who is worth working with will respect you. Matter of fact, if people have a problem, and we're of course we're talking about dictating appropriate, reasonable terms. We're not talking about dictating ridiculousness. If this is like you're like, dictating that you want a trailer for like, an AFI short film that, you're going to be cast in as like a background. Come on, it's like within reason, but to be very clear and assertive, right? Politely assertive. It should be respected, and it's a good sign that you're not working with good people if they have a problem with that. If they have a problem with you saying, "Hey, this is what I'm doing. This is what I expect in return. This is how I want to be treated,"
and being able to negotiate on the fly again with like I said, with the caveats thing, where it's at TIFF last year when I was doing camera work for the TV network here. I remember I had a daily pay and that was a 8-hour pay. It was, or no, I can't remember what the day was. It was 11 hours. Sorry.
Yeah.
The 11-hour day. And I got paid a certain amount for those 11 hours. And there was one night, it was the wrap night, where we had to basically, the whole way that TIFF works is that there's one hotel downtown that all of the media is done in. So like all the interviews, all that are all done in this hotel. So like every news organization, every entertainment, Entertainment Tonight's there, blah, blah, blah. IMDb, they've got their suite set up.
Right.
So it is basically this big building. And of course, when you're trying to tear that down at the end and you're trying to strike the set at the end of the week, it's going to take a while because you have to get everything you have to use the service elevators. You got to get everything out. You got to load the truck, blah, blah, blah. There's lots of trips up and down and stuff like that. And so I wound up being there about double the time that I was being paid to be there. And, I very, again, calmly and respectfully kind of went up to the producer afterwards and I said, "Hey, I'll likely invoice you for these extra hours." And then we negotiated a price and it was fine. And there was no like weird,
Absolutely.
Harsh talk or any fight. They just kind of said, "Yeah, of course." And we sat down and we negotiated what and I wound up getting paid essentially double what I was making because that was the hourly. It was exactly.
It was appropriate, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a good example. Yeah. And so I think when you come from a place of, you value yourself and you have a bit of self-confidence and you're reasonable, then this is likely going to be the outcome. And again, if he would have replied to you in a way that would have been completely dismissive then you just know, okay, I checked this person off my list. I'm never working with them again. Done deal. And then over time, you build up a network of people who have treated you well and you've got along with, and then this is likely what Herzog has done, right?
Yeah,
and it takes time, but absolutely. So,
but much in line with what we were talking about last time too, that goes for when you're in charge too. I was very clear on the outset of this feature that anybody on set, I'd like them to be in the very least compensated for their time, if not an honorarium or gas money or some sort of monetary compensation for their time, plus points in their contracts of, if we recoup costs, that they get a percentage of that. Recoup.
Good point. So as a leader, so we've kind of been talking about if you're being brought onto a project by somebody else, but that's a really good point, Cullen. If you're the head honcho, if you're the lead in the project and you're bringing people into your project, do not shortchange this process. You don't have to, depending on scale, you don't have to overly formalize it. Again, you don't have to go to a 60-page contract with attorneys and everything. But, I think the people that you bring on board are going to really, really respect you for being clear in your communication and being assertive and direct, and even putting expectations and putting returns on paper can be very simple. But I really feel like if you're looking for a way to immediately step up your game for how professional and you're coming off and how much respect you have with your cast and crew, there is a darn good way to do it right there, and it wouldn't cost you anything but time.
Yeah.
So, and with that in mind, then let's jump to Herzog talks about familiarizing yourself with basic legal terms and concepts. And thank goodness we live in a day and age where you can do that practically for nothing online. There are so many sample contracts that you can look through and read. There are so many books that cover and content online that covers general legalese as well as legalese specific to the film industry. And it's not that you have to jam all of your contracts or agreements with people full of this legalese, but having a basic understanding of how a contract is structured is going to give you the ability to do what we just said, to not only discern what people are putting in front of your face and asking you to sign, but to help you as the leader of your project to put together simple but effective and clear contracts for all of your cast and crew. So and I won't name any specifics, but there really are some. I mean, if you just go, if you like, books, there's YouTube videos, there's like a ton of content.
Oh, yeah. I mean, as you said, we live in a very wonderful era in that you can essentially, you have a dictionary at your doorstep at any time. And so you can very easily...
Wait, dictionary at your doorstep? I've never heard that one
They
before.
show up to my door every day and they're knocking. But
is that what? So Canada is so interesting to me in so many different ways.
That's how we learn our words.
We used to get phone books. I don't know if you're old enough to remember getting phone books.
I was right at the cusp of that. Yeah.
But how but that would be if our country actually delivered dictionaries to our doorstep, maybe we would be a lot better off. Maybe we, I don't. Anyway. People probably wouldn't read them, but no. So I get your point.
But I do think it's really, I think it's really important, though, like you said, is that making them simple. Don't try and throw in all these these legal jargon words for the sake of sounding smart.
Don't try to act fancy. It's
just lay out what is going to be. What the contract is covering, essentially. Lay it out in as simple as the terms as possible.
Yeah, and usually it's just and again, we're not going to get it. We're not attorneys, and we're not going to give any specific advice or anything. But yeah, I mean, basically, in a nutshell, it's it's a record of what you're going to do, and then what you're going to receive for having done that. And that, I mean, it's it's just expectations. This is what I expect to do, and this is what I expect to receive in return. That's it. It's really that simple. For this level, and of course, my goodness, if you're if you're working on a $20 million budget, 10 million, 5 million, 1 million, I mean, then you're going to have more things to go through. And I go back to how we started. I think it's prudent to work with an attorney who understands what they're doing if you're going into a project like that. But I think at the level that most of us are working at, you can really accomplish things with a very simple half-page agreement. I even just call them agreements. Contracts. I mean,
again, it's exactly what you said. It's negotiating. That's the whole point of the thing, right? It's like I think again, it's another a misconception that a lot of people think that you almost have to have this like barrier of communication when you're writing a contract or an agreement to just hand it to the person and hope that. But no, work on it with the person.
No, it's a collaboration.
Exactly.
It's a collaboration. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Good. So another great point, Colin. Yeah, it's not like you write this out in a dark, smoke-filled room and then you hand it to the other.
You mail it to them
and then you mail it to them, and it's
thing,
like you must sign this. I think and that's where it's like I don't ever use the word. On small, tiny projects, I don't use the word contracts because it's intimidating and scary. I just say, hey, let's throw together an agreement real quick.
Yeah, they're not divorce papers.
Let's just both work out what we want out of this deal, and and then we have it on paper, and then we have a clear understanding. Like that. That's all I ever do there. But it's often Herzog speaks to this. It's more than just money. I mean, this is also an opportunity where you can name collaborators. You can, make as part of the components of your contract that you can work with certain people, or that you can hire certain other if you're going to be a department head, to hire different people that you want to work with. I mean, there's so many different aspects of this.
Yeah.
I see it as an opportunity to kind of dictate your terms or come to good agreements with other people. So, and I think Herzog speaks to this too. And, Herzog is huge on urgency. We've talked about, I think, just about every lesson here thus far. Urgency has come into play at least once. Herzog definitely doesn't like to mess around when he makes films. And it's no different here. He mentions that, look, if you can't make a deal relatively quickly, it's likely that you're not going to have one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for the most part, that's pretty true.
Yeah.
If you can't come to an agreement on how to work with somebody now, and what the project's going to look like, and it takes you more than a week or so to do that, yeah, it's unlikely that things are going to go anywhere.
And if it does work, it's more often or not going to be a strained relationship,
yeah.
because there's going to always be those backside things that you were spent hours mulling over with each other, and
right.
It sucks the fun.
It just might not be right. It just may not be if there's that many stickling points, or if the communication is that strained, or whatever the case may be. Maybe it's time to move on.
Well, I think another great point that Herzog makes, though, in this lesson is about the fact that, especially working with larger financiers, or if you're kind of, again, director for hire, or you've been brought on to a project, accept that you can always be fired, and that replacement is, not to scare yourself, but let that kind of make you strive to do better and to prove that you are the only person who should be capable of doing that job. And I think that kind of mindset really changes the way that you operate on sets, and it'll make you more willing to kind of, both be flexible, but also be very confident in yourself and be able to sort of say, yeah, you know what, I'm here for a reason, and I'm gonna do what I can to prove that not only should I be hired for this project or continue to be hired for this project, but I should be hired for other projects too, because if there's producers that like you on one project, they will likely, again, call you back for more and more work.
Interesting. So you're saying that just kind of keep in mind that you're not, that you're expendable in a sense.
I think a lot of directors get this head about them where it's like, this is even if it's not a script they wrote, even if they were brought onto the project just to direct, they get this head about them that it's like, this is my project, this is my vision. I'm the one that's making this movie. And, a lot of times those people can really be fired. It happens in major films. How many movies that, big Hollywood blockbusters that came out in the last 5 years have we heard about directors being fired or being let go or splitting due to creative differences and kind of things like that. And it's like, you have confidence in your work, but also understand that
have some humility.
Have some humility and understand that, you might, you can screw up. And you can screw up badly, and do everything you can to avoid that, and take every precaution you can to make sure that doesn't happen. And things usually, wind up going pretty well.
Well, and that's, I think, just in general, right? You do the best you can. It's, I think everybody who's in this industry has a passion about being in it, because, my goodness, like, why would you be doing this if you weren't extremely passionate about it? Your likelihood of being able to provide a living for yourself and your family as a filmmaker is ridiculously low. The stress and insecurity that comes from this career is ridiculous. So the assumption would be that you're quite passionate about it. Mm-hmm. So if you aren't, my goodness, ask yourself, what are you doing here, right? I guess just in general. I mean, if you're on set and there's a million other places you want to be, I'd say go do something else. But
I think, again, it just comes down to communication, especially on set. With, again, one of the first things that I spoke to the producers on this feature about was that we have to make sure we have an open line of communication, so that if I feel something's not going well on the set, we can have a private conversation about that. Not, you never want to air that dirty laundry in front of the crew, but perhaps there's some time when you really just need to rant to somebody, and a producer can be a very good person to do that too, because they often are the people in the position that can fix those problems. And at the same time, I said to them, if I'm doing something that you aren't happy with, or that you feel could be done differently or whatever, then we can have that conversation. It's about, people, again, going back to that earlier point that I made, people get so afraid of words they say coming off as insult, when in reality, I think that you just have to have understanding that pretty much everyone on that set is doing their job to make the best movie they can make,
Yeah.
right top to bottom. And if you understand that, even if there's a
Ideally.
creative
Yeah.
decision, yeah, ideally, yeah, but even if there's a creative difference between your vision and the producer's vision, at the end of the day, the producer's vision is to make the movie the best they can, just as yours is. So just talk to the people, just be willing to have these conversations, and usually
Right.
that'll be, that
Well,
can oftentimes be
this
a lifeline.
and this goes back to working with people that you can trust, and being assertive but polite, and communicating expectations and responsibilities from the get-go. I think
Hmm.
all of these things are kind of hand in hand. But let's talk a little bit briefly here in our last few minutes about negotiating specifically with actors.
Hmm.
Herzog breaks out that section kind of specifically and talks about negotiating for actors. If I'm not mistaken, I think he talks about making an offer to Christian Bale for I'm like just totally spacing the name of the film, which was it's Rescue Dawn, right? But that was the. Am I correct in that one, Colin? Rescue
Hmm.
Dawn is the Christian Bale, like
Yes.
the
Yeah.
POW, yeah, which I quite liked. I quite liked that flick. Um, but he talks about how reaching out to him and not being able to offer Christian Bale anywhere near his going rate, and obviously this is not a problem that most of us are going to have, in the sense that you're going to be reaching out to A-list actors and not being able to offer them their rate.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but and Herzog is in obviously a very unique position relative to most of us, in the sense that he has a body of work that puts him in a position where he can have talent wants to work with him,
Yeah, he's quite
and will.
prolific. Yeah.
Yeah, well, not just prolific, but I mean, he is legendary, man.
Yeah.
Come on,
Yeah.
this is why we're
Yeah.
here. Like, the
That's a good
guy's a
point.
legend, okay?
Yeah.
It's like a lot of people might be prolific, but that doesn't mean they're good. He's
Hmm.
both prolific and good. So I think, he has access to a roster of talent that want to work with him, both in front of the camera and behind, that most of us won't have. But having said that, there is definitely there are negotiations to be had for talent for your film, whoever you are out there, and certainly, we start right off the bat with quality of script, right? This is just ridiculously huge. If your script is killer, then obviously you're going to be much more likely to be in a good negotiating position for
Hmm.
talent.
Hmm.
Actors, I've seen a lot of cases where actors took quite a bit less than they might have otherwise taken, because the role they felt offered a lot to them, just as an actor or as an artist or as an opportunity to be seen in a different way. So I think that goes without saying, though. I mean, the stronger your script, stronger your story, the more leverage you have in every single instance of filmmaking. But yeah, I mean, and he talks about. I think he talks also about convincing people to work on your film. How do you find actors, negotiate, etc. I mean, uh, your passion for the project is so important.
Hmm.
And there we kind of cut right. It's like being passionate. You don't want to stretch. We talked in the very beginning, kind of stretching the realities of your project because you're so passionate about it. But I can't tell you how many times I've seen passion in the room win out. And I don't what your experience is with this, but passion and clarity of vision are
Yeah.
so important. I mean, they are so vital as a director. Of course, that's what you do as a director. You are the person with the vision, and you communicate that vision to other departments to execute it.
Hmm.
But I have seen so many directors not have clarity of vision,
Oh, geez. Yeah. The
and
silent
it
types.
and I just well or and look, there's so many different types of people that you don't have to be an extroverted, gregarious,
No,
pitchy,
absolutely not. Yeah.
used cars, definitely not like the used car salesman. Sorry if anybody out there is used car salesman. I don't mean any disrespect. It's a shorthand, um but I have seen it. I have seen it so many times, and it's a skill that you have got to work on. It Your ability to concisely, with passion, present your vision for a film is so key.
Hmm.
And right
Absolutely.
here is a great area where it's key to be able to impart that passion to a to a collaborator. Here we're talking specifically about actors, but it could be anywhere, is so vital. And that starts with your connection to the story, in my opinion. It can't start with this is a stepping stone for my career. I'm going to get recognition from this. I'm going to get money from this. You cannot manufacture the kind of passion that comes from being deeply, deeply connected to the story that you're telling. You can't, I just don't think you can fake it. And I think when that's real and you're sitting at a table with an actor or, a prospective actor, or you're, writing a letter to an actor's agent to see if they could potentially take a meeting with you or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You can't fake that. It is so key. And I have seen it happen, like when that director or producer sometimes too, as part of a pitch, have that true, deep, connected passion to a story. It's amazing. People are waiting for that. People are they are just desperate to see that. When you walk in the room with that, you can blow a place up, man.
Yeah,
I don't know if you've seen this too, but so that's so important. It's so key. I mean, I would, and some of these skills you kind of have to practice. Not everybody is, sometimes it takes work. You have to really put in work to be able to kind of practice or rehearse your pitches to really get, your ability to concisely tell your story to somebody, to sell them on it, so to speak, can be rehearsed. It can be practiced. It is a skill that can be refined,
Mm-hmm.
So I just don't think that if it's not there innately, immediately, that you can't, work on that. You totally can work on that. I mean, I can only imagine. Okay, Cullen, wouldn't this be great? Can you just imagine Herzog in a pitch room? Or like, he's in a studio, like he's in a meeting,
Yeah.
and he's like trying to get money for a script.
I just want to be. I would have loved to be in that moment where he realized that that Fitzcarraldo was more, interestingly about the boat than about anything else.
Yeah,
and like just hearing him kind of make that discovery and go, I want to make the movie about the boat.
I would so love to hear Herzog in a room, especially maybe when he was, I have a hunch he's never been one to beg or, to really work to sell so much. But I think just his true, genuine passion for whatever story that he's telling at the moment, it's infectious, and it's clearly infectious, because here we are right now. We're talking about him. Look at the films he's made, and of course, not only is this important for sitting down and negotiating with actors or pitching to actors, but of course, this is like your passion and connectivity to the story is what, like, why make a film if you're not? It's
Yeah.
But I just want to kind of reiterate and focus on how important that is. Where I'm actually in the process of doing this now, and I'm going to learn more from this, and maybe I can come back in a later episode and share from this process. But right now, we're in pre-production on a low-budget horror feature film, and we've got the script, pretty darn close. We're all pretty happy with it. We're in the process of fundraising for the film, and we're doing pretty well. And we're at a stage where we're going to try to see if we can get some letters of intent, basically. So we're reaching out to a handful of actors for several roles, people that we are inspired by, whose acting we genuinely, truly appreciate, but who we also feel could be a good fit for the roles. And we're sending out basically pitches to take meetings, and this is one of the great benefits of IMDb Pro, for example. It's pretty darn easy to get a hold of a manager or an agent for somebody. And we're going to see what happens.
And you can get a free month trial for IMDb Pro. So if you're making a movie,
hey,
just
and
utilize
IMDb
that,
Pro,
right?
if you want to sponsor this podcast, please, by all means.
Yeah,
but yeah, you can get it. Yeah, you can get, and just also they offer so many discounts too. I know that I get a pretty substantial discount for being SAG-AFTRA. There are a lot of so there's a lot of avenues to go there. But you're right, you could even get a month free. So I just want to say that being able to communicate that passion of your project is just boom. It's super killer key. But I'll let people. I'll kind of keep you guys up to speed and let you know how this process goes. I'm sure I'm going to
Me
learn
as
a
well.
lot
Yeah.
about it. Yeah, I'm sure I'll learn a lot about it.
I
But
think we're about the same place for both of our features there.
oh, are
So
you okay? You're doing the same thing right now,
yeah,
roughly,
right.
or
I mean, at the moment we are basically
okay?
finishing up script and in pre with like budget and all that, and that's essentially
Okay. Well, you
where
know
we're
what?
at.
We'll kind of compare notes, and we can
Yeah.
share our experiences with our listeners here as we go. Because I'm definitely going to be learning from this as well. I have never had name talent in a project yet that I've been a significant part of, so
Hmm.
I'm looking really forward to seeing how this goes. Yeah. So. Good luck to you too, and
Yeah.
we'll let people know. Well, what do you think, Cullen? I think we've covered pretty much
Hmm.
everything that Herzog touched on and added our own little spin and thoughts to it here. Any last parting comments about negotiations that you've got?
No, I think we kind of hashed it all out there.
Awesome. Well, once again, Cullen, I want to thank you for spending some time with me here discussing one of my favorite directors of all time and his philosophies on filmmaking. I had a blast, and I hope you listeners also enjoyed it. And we will see you next time where we will discuss Lesson 7 Locations.
There we
Awesome.
go.
All right, Cullen. Thank you so much, buddy. And everybody, we'll see you next time. Take
Yeah.
care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.